I just want to welcome everyone once again to our Youth and Young Adult Ministries online course. This is Session 2 in Early Adolescence and the Conceptual Framework for Tapestry of Faith. I'm Nancy Combs-Morgan, the MidAmerica Coordinator in Youth and Young Adult Ministries and also Faith Development Director in Heartland District. And that's to see of new folks. Actually, I know you, Lane. Hey, Lane, how are you doing?
I'm good, better. Sorry I missed last time. I got hit with the cooties.
Yeah.
Okay. And we also have another new participant, or actually who's been looking at our site. And Anne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Ann Kadlacek, and I'm DRE at Westminster Unitarian Church in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. This is my second year there. I'm in the credentialing program, and so when somebody offers something for free that counts toward credentialing, you can just sign me up.
Yeah.
I also have some youth and young adult issues that I'm working with at the moment, so I'm kind of looking at this through the lens of my immediate needs as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, this could be helpful. Who knows?
I think so.
Hopefully, yeah. The stuff we go over is designed. That's what it's designed for. Is to get everybody a little more competent in working with youth and young adult ministries. So maybe if there were some issues, this might help out. We also might have some time to talk about specific things too. If not on the video conferences, then on the phone conferences. That was designed to be a place. Those were designed to be a place for people to bring those kind of things up. So maybe we'll be able to help out. Continue, Nancy.
I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself, Lane, and where you're serving.
Okay. I am serving as the Lifespan Director of Religious Education and Faith Development at the Edmonds Unitarian Church, which is a little bit north of Seattle. In my 5th year here already, which blows my mind, but there you have it. And came originally from Heartland, where I served a couple different churches in the Cincinnati area for about 15 years. So Nancy and Phil and I were sort of newbies together way back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed.
Welcome. And Laura, would you like to reintroduce yourself? We may not be able to do this every time, but I thought it would be nice for this one.
Sure. I'm Laura Stevens. I am the Director of Religious Education at the Exeter, New Hampshire Church. I am in my 3rd year there. This is my 5th year being a DRE.
Excellent. And Anne, what level of credentialing are you going for associate credentialed or master's? Do you know?
Master, actually. I sort of took a look at it and decided that was where I wanted to end up, and that the most efficient way to get there was to just jump in and do it. So that's what I'm working on.
Okay. Well, good. Yeah, and, we kind of went over the different levels in that first section, and so that's there to refer to in both the PowerPoints, or if you want to listen to them again, we kind of talk about what's going on, how this course relates to the credentialing process and the different levels. And that's also something we're more than happy to talk about when we do our phone calls as well. It's helpful prepare for that. And Linnea, I believe, is on. Yes, Linnea, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I'm on. Thank you.
Excellent. Hey, we just did another brief round of introductions, so if you could just tell us where you're at, how long you've been there.
Sure. I'm Linnea Nelson. I'm the DRE at UUCF in Fairfax, and actually Oakton, but it's UUCF Fairfax. And I've been here since August, and I am, just finished a chapel session, and I'm sitting in the chapel right now, and looking forward to the second session.
Great. That's Fairfax, Virginia?
Correct.
Yeah, I went to George Mason.
Oh, okay, great. You know our neck of the woods.
Yeah, for the creative writing program, so that was fun.
Great.
All right. Well, let's just go ahead and jump into this a little bit. I think I overloaded this. We've got a lot of stuff to do. If we have some time left over, I just want to check in about how things are going with litmus and everything like that. What Nancy and I decided we'd do is kind of divide this up I'm going to cover the developmental stuff, the early adolescence. Basically, going through the content from that Tracy Hurd book, but also, and you were able to download the chapter on young adolescents. And also just take a look at a couple other things that have some bearing on the subject. And then Nancy is going to look at the Tapestry of Faith conceptual framework, and then we're going to look at a couple Tapestry of Faith curricula and actually show how that conceptual framework plays out in them. And what we decided, as Lane knows, as we've talked about this, is Nancy and I have been kind of like putting this together as we're going along. And what we think might work well is over this session and the three following ones is doing basically this sort of thing, covering the developmental stage, so early adolescence, middle adolescence, emerging adulthood, and young adulthood. Covering one of the developmental stages, and then covering some sort of area around there. So next time we're going to do rites of passage. So we'll do middle adolescence and rites of passage, and then we'll take our break. During that break, we might do a couple phone calls to catch up with our phone calls, and then after that, we would do emerging adulthood and something else like worship. And after that, we would do young adulthood and something else, maybe like service. Does that sound about right, Nancy, that we were talking about? Yeah. So those things that they're asking for in the credentialing process for you to be able to demonstrate your skill and knowledge, those are the things we're going to cover: rites of passage, worship, service opportunities. So, all right, so that's the general plan now, and we'll have time for questions about that. Nancy?
I have a little short reading and a centering question as we begin.
That's right. Good. Okay.
Ray Bradbury, we are cupped, constantly and quietly being filled. The trick is knowing how to tip ourselves over and let the beautiful stuff out. Tracy Hurd, in her work, asks us, how can we best support children and youth and young adults as they grow and develop and embark on life's journeys? Unitarian Universalist faith, and this is something I hope that we can all share this avowal. Unitarian Universalist faith equips us with values and compassion, but knowledge about child and youth and young adult and adult development is also necessary too. So that's one of the paradigms that we are working on in this course.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what we're going to do is basically go through that Nurturing Children and Youth, the Young Adolescent section from Tracy Hurd's book. If you don't have the book, Nancy made available this particular chapter on the readings in Litmos, and I hope you're here. If you haven't got it yet, that you'll access it, you can go through it and review it. So basically, we're going to just look at, what this period means for this age group, and that age group again is basically 12 to 15. Although, as some of us know, puberty is happening earlier and earlier, and so these issues will come up. Some of these things will come up as a child hits puberty earlier, and also that 12 to 15 range. It's just somewhere in there, but that's the general range we're talking about. So first of all, physical growth, peak time for physical growth, puberty. And I don't know how many of you posted like middle school overnight, but how much food you need, right? Can I get an amen to that?
Amen.
Like gallons of milk and huge boxes of cereal. They just, and I think, that's like they grow the most at this point than any time since they were infants, right? The body just like takes off. And what it's doing, of course, is transitioning to that adult body. It requires a lot of energy. They eat more and they sleep more. And some of the things that are going on at that period, at that time period, may or may not demonstrate behaviors that might indicate a risk for eating disorders or depression. I think that's a really interesting thing to keep in mind. It might be natural in this growth phase for for an adolescent to demonstrate some things that could be very concerning if it occurred in somebody in a different developmental stage, just in terms of how they're eating and the way they're acting. And it could be a sign of an eating disorder or depression. And so she does talk a lot. She does mention that it's very important for people to kind of, be in touch and contact with the adolescents and try to get a sense of what's going on. Okay? And then this is very important too. They seek support for. Okay. Okay. They're seeking support for their self-esteem and their body image. And we'll talk a little bit more about that support in a second too. But we also have the cognitive and intellectual development going on now. They're moving from only thinking concretely to more abstract thinking, including hypothetical thinking. And I'm going to repeat that. They're moving from concrete to more abstract thinking, including hypothetical thinking. And I just want you to remember that word hypothetical because it comes up in your test for knowledge section. Okay? All right? Okay. Hypothetical. All right. Concentrates on self and others' perceptions of the self. And I really love this. Engages an imaginary audience, a mental idea of others watching. Does anybody remember doing that when they were 13? You just thought everybody was watching everything you did, and very self-conscious. And so it's good to remember that that's part of this phase. They don't demonstrate that in later adolescence. It's really here where that self-consciousness is just so weighing in on. Another interesting thing is this is where those particular multiple intelligences start to become apparent. The multiple intelligences that Howard Gardner talks about. She lists a few here, but they're actually the linguistic, the logical mathematical, the spatial, the bodily kinesthetic, the musical, the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the naturalist, and the existential. So, this is, I believe this is part of where, when we look at an adolescent's age and they're suddenly seen like a different person, part of that is this, different intelligences starting to come through, and we can start to appreciate that in them. But it's kind of a new thing for many of them. So,
Bill, may I?
Pardon me?
I think, may I interject?
Yeah.
I think one piece of this is that a lot of us already know much of this. We have reviewed the material, and we think, okay, it's over there somewhere. And I think what's helpful is realizing that in the credentialing program, the expectation of having this knowledge of human development is not just an aside. This is something that perhaps with your RE committee or maybe with your minister of actually unpacking and doing some debrief and say what session is working on what level of cognitive or intellectual development. I know that sounds like extra work, but it gives a broader spectrum that we're attending to in a thoughtful way this understanding of human development and not just saying we're going to line up a bunch of programs. So I just wanted to interject that this can be used in a committee session where this is all you talk about is looking at different sessions and saying, how does it respond to this or that?
Yeah, certainly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we get on to talking about things like worship, right? Children's worship is may be different than when we're thinking about early adolescent worship. Because of this, those streaks becoming more evident, right? So we might need to include more things in worship with early adolescents than we had been doing with children. Does that make sense? And so like you were saying, Nancy, right, if we're going to have a children's worship session and talk about what we want to do, we have to be very mindful that this is a great opportunity to help them explore these things, right? And if we're leaving some of these intelligences out of the worship, right, we're maybe giving some of the kids, some of the adolescents are losing an opportunity to start to explore something that's really budding in them. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about, Nancy, where being aware of these things is going to help us as we do our work with our staff, our volunteers, as we think about approaching things like worship, service, things like that. Correct?
And just as to hold on to a thought, that once we go through some of these developmental pieces for the young adolescent, I'd love to hear feedback from the learning community participants on other ways to offer support. That was one of the sections of Tracy's article.
Sure. We'll get to that.
A little statement if there were other ideas of ways to support this age group. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Great. And so then we move into the social affective development. Peers become very important. I think we know that too. We've seen that happen, the influence of peers. Acceptance with peers is very important, seeking out similar peers. Beginning to explore things like racial, ethnic, gender, and sexual identities. And they may enact, this was a very interesting section in Tracy Hurd's thing, they may enact racial, ethnic, gender stereotypes as part of the process of developing their own identity. So this awareness of different identities, the understanding that they may have some of those identities to explore, they might actually over-explore in terms of a stereotype in order to kind of figure out what's going on. And actually, that's a big part of adolescence. I remember reading something about moral development, and when adolescents, early adolescents, and even middle adolescents, when they cross a line, when they test something out, it's actually still, it's part of their moral development. And the question is really, what did they learn about themselves when they did that? So when they break curfew or something like that, they're testing things out. They're stretching the boundaries. And so the question really is, what did they learn about themselves? And I think that's what's happening, too, with this perhaps moving towards some of the stereotypes and racial, ethnic, and gender identities. Moving towards the stereotypes is testing them out and seeing what they can learn about themselves. So that's something to understand, too. When somebody goes to an extreme, when an early adolescent goes to an extreme, they're exploring. And, it might be a little like, whoa, what's going on here? But it's really learning about themselves, and that's the question. What did you learn about yourself when you did this? So, let's see. Continuing on the social and effective development, heightened consciousness about race, and a pressure to fit in, and keep that in mind, this whole idea of fitting in, perhaps with one racial group. And we're going to talk a little bit, too, about how things may be changing because of the demographics in the U.S. changing. Learn social scripts embedded in the context of race, ethnicity, and class about what it means to be a sexual person. So sexuality is tied up with all of this as well. And then I think we probably are aware of this. They express criticism of self and others. That's something that happens with the early adolescents. They're more willing to be critical and express it. In terms of moral development, then, they start to demonstrate an interest in the ethics of care and justice. They might have a respect for the social order, although they want to challenge it as well, and that's what I was talking about. That is the learning opportunity. You go past the border, you go past the boundary to challenge it and see what happens, and that is how you kind of learn who you are as a moral person, and early adolescence is a prime time to be doing that. But then you do learn how to put ethics of justice into action, perhaps through community service, and I think that's what we're going to talk about service later, and this, again, is a prime time to be offering service opportunities to adolescents in the early adolescence phase.
May I?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Can we go back to slide 7?
Sure.
Thank you. It's interesting that often we can be a little bit strident with our young adolescents around these issues because I feel, I should make an I statement, that it's one of the most important things we have to impart in Unitarian Universalism, growing kind, caring, humane human beings. And I've seen in congregational life that also responsive to their developmental needs to express this in drama and art. There is a real engagement that happens through demonstrating what we can sometimes come on a little bit heavy and engaging the art and the mind. There was a recent public broadcasting program. I'll try to find the active link. It's called Art in the Mind, which talks about how this sense of engagement with moral and ethical issues is really embedded in young adolescents when they can act it out, where they can demonstrate a narrative, where they can do it in drama or poetry or song.
That would be a great resource to take a look at. Thank you, Nancy. And as Nancy mentioned, the first session too, as we go through these things and you reflect on them and you think that you have a resource you can share with us, that's part of being in the learning community, let us know about it. We'll get it up on the documents, additional documents, and let people point them out to people so they can take a look at them. So here's the spiritual, religious, and faith development. And this is another one of those either-or things, or both and, is some early adolescents might enjoy having a religious creed, something to, whereas others might really enjoy not having a religious creed. But the important thing is, I think, that they're engaging with the whole concepts of religious creeds, et cetera. So they express interest in a religion that embodies one's values, their values. I think this is the time where we often hear from early adolescents about how hypocritical it might be, that we have these 7 principles, yet we're doing this. And that's because they're looking to see how this religion helps them embody their values, and that's very important to them. Sustained faith development by engaging with a community that allows questioning, and I think that's a wonderful thing because that is something that Unitarian Universalism is particularly well suited for doing. So Nancy mentioned the support at this early adolescent stage, and Tracy Hurd gives us lots of good ideas here. So one, support a critical perspective on media images about beauty and adulthood. And I don't know if we do that very well. I think there's some curricula out there, some resources out there to help us do that, and perhaps that should be something we prioritize a little bit more. I think that some of this stuff is covered in OWL, right? About body images and beauty.
There's a whole session in the middle school, high school OWL on the media images.
Right, so that's kind of, one of the reasons why I think OWL is so important as well. So promote healthy body image and self-esteem, and this used to be oftentimes particularly about girls, but, we're hearing about more and more boys using steroids because they see, the way guys look on TV all the time, and so they want to look like them too. So they're starting to be obsessed with body image as well. Not that they never have been that way, but it might be more and more prevalent among adolescents now, male adolescents, than it used to be. Affirm and support their physical, emotional, and cognitive changes. Be flexible and responsive. And I think any of these things here, that's the default setting that we should have, is flexible and responsive. If a youth at this age is coming at us with any of these things going on in their lives, the first thing they need is for us to really be flexible. We can't be rigid about, you used to be this way and now you're this way and what happened. And we know that there's all sorts of exploring going on here, and our ability to kind of listen to what's happening and be responsive and be flexible in our responses, I think is one of the best ways we can support them around any of these issues. Model respect. This is the time for us to be very respectful of them as human beings, understanding all this thing that's going on, all these changes and things that are going on with them. Provide opportunities for complex thinking and the pondering of big questions. So when we talk about curricula, there might be some curricula that we would want to explore that would do this. And then listen first, she mentions. Excuse me. And by golly, that's always a good thing, isn't it? What's the phrase, think first to understand, then to be understood? That applies to everybody, right? So listen first, what's really going on here, and really try to respond from that trying to understand first. So I'm trying to look, there's there's another resource I want to take a look at. I think I've got it here. All right. Oh, I might have to access it another way. Nancy, could you just chat for a moment? I'm going to move on to the next screen. Oh, no, we'll finish this up here, and then I'll do the next one. But I might have to access this a different way. Recognize that challenging authority provides an outlet for new cognitive skills, and that whole moral development and everything is seen as challenge authority. Find out who they are when they do that. You don't know what it means for you to challenge authority, how you feel about it, what it tells you who you are, about who you are, unless you try it, right? So, recognize that they're going to be doing that, and that's helping them understand these new cognitive skills they have. Afford autonomy within limits of safety, and we'll get back to that safety thing in just a moment. Okay, come on here. Excuse me. There's something I really want to read here, and I'm having a hard time downloading it. So, let me see. Yes, engage in honest, supportive talk about sexuality, and that's what OWL does so incredibly well. Provide information and resources about healthy sexuality that are from a range of sexualities and gender identities. And I think that's, of course, what OWL does well also. But it's also part of the larger conversation now than it has been in the past, talking about different kinds of sexualities and gender identities. That conversation is moving its way down to earlier and earlier youth, and so I think they have the opportunity to talk more about those sort of things. So, and then, okay, I've got my thing here, I hope. And then provide outlets for questioning faith, religion, and creed. And then finally, have a sense of humor. Very important. So, what I'd like to offer, Nancy, would you like any comments on this so far, Nancy?
The curiosity is that the 12 to 15-year-olds are also looking for a certain amount of predictability in our congregations. Right. I remember one congregation I was working with that was going through a major revamping of the sequence of how they did coming of age and OWL, and then also the bridging ceremony, which they did. And there had been, a 13-year-old that had been sort of growing up, had an older teen sibling who knew the sequence and was expecting a certain order in the congregational life, and it really started DRE when this teen said, oh, but no, this has to happen then and then. And so even though they want this support to be creative and to have lots of opportunities to ask questions, they're also wanting transparent predictability from us, that the experience that they have heard from their peers that are so worthwhile, that those will still be offered in some way, some form, in support for them.
Right. They need the context that they can recognize that they're moving into something that is predictable in some ways, and they need that in order to cross boundaries too. I mean, they need to know where the edges are in order to explore the edges. So they want both things. And if you don't have that predictability in some ways, if you don't have those boundaries and edges, they don't have an opportunity to really explore these changes that are going on in them. Right, Nancy?
And also out of curiosity for our learning community folks online and on the phone, do you all offer a coming-of-age program? We'll be talking about rites of passage more, but this is just a quick question so I can sort of be thinking about it. Do you offer it for this particular age group, the more middle school, kind of earlier, younger adolescent, or do you offer it for the middle adolescent, the more 15 to 18-year-olds? Anybody involved in a coming-of-age program or anything like that, and what sequence?
Yeah, we're running, this is Laura, we're running a coming-of-age program this year, and we, for this age group,
And for this age group, the 12 to 15-year-olds?
Yeah.
And was that intentional, that you always do it for the younger adolescent?
It has not been done in a few years. So my hope was to offer this right after OWL, to kind of continue offering them something, because I know at this age it's easy to lose them.
Right. Anybody else willing to share?
Yeah, this is Anne. We offer OWL and Coming of Age alternating years for 8th and 9th graders.
Okay.
And in fact, I'm in the middle of writing what we're going to do for Coming of Age next year, so my head is very full of Coming of Age right now. Because it used to be a program of like half a dozen short workshops, and I'm turning it into a full year course. So yeah, this is kind of fun, and this is all very relevant because I'm looking at all of these elements here, and pretty much everything here is in what I'm working with for Coming of Age or is in OWL. So it's like between 8th and 9th grade, but we're pretty much hitting all of these at some level, which is kind of cool.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Linnea has written something to us. We are making some changes in our MS offerings, middle school, and what I'm learning will help to present our suggestions with a background of research. Yes, that's exactly what you were saying, Nancy, right? When you go back to your kiddies, etc., you got some good research and things to talk about here. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Well, here's something I wanted to share with you. I haven't put this article up in the document yet, but it's from the Fuller Youth Institute, which is a Christian group, so they end up talking about God and Jesus at some point, but a lot of the stuff is just very practical, sociological sort of things that they're covering. And they have a very nice article called Youth Ministry in the Age of Delayed Adulthood, so it fits in with this whole idea of emerging adulthood. And basically they cover the same ages that we're covering. And they have some interesting tips about what the challenges are for doing youth ministry at the first three levels. And I just wanted to point out the ones that they mentioned for early adolescence. And they talk about the importance of family in youth ministry. And I think, I don't know about you, but in my experience, that's been something that in the past, traditional UU youth ministry may have left out, the importance of having family involved in the youth ministry. And there's a couple things. Tracy Hurd mentioned that this affirmation part. She says alternative social messages from family and church communities can affirm broader, more accepting perspectives on sexuality, but probably also, on race and gender and all those other things as well. And parental support, communication, and monitoring are constantly correlated with reduced at-risk sexual behavior in youth. As adolescents search for their identities, and it's not just the sexual identities, it's all the identities, family members retain primary influences. So, in OWL, we talk about that a lot, the importance of the family, but it's beyond that, too. It's really about, the race and the ethnicities and all these other things that they're working on, that they're thinking about, that they're trying to figure out what is their identity here. And if we can let parents know, let families know that their influence is still primary here, I think that's important. And that reminded me, too, Christian Smith, who did this national study of youth and religion, and he wrote a book called Soul Searching. Is that it, Nancy? Do you remember the name of it? Yes. And he interviewed a lot of children, a lot of young adolescents, not children, although he uses the word children here coming up. And he says the research he did clearly shows that the single most important social influence on the religious and spiritual lives of adolescents is their parents. The single most important social influence on their religious and spiritual lives is their parents. And so that's just all the more reason, especially at this age, to make sure that the parents and the families are involved with what we're doing. And OWL is a good model on how you do that, and there might be some ways to bring in more of that kind of intentionality into other parts of our youth programming, especially around this age, okay? And so I do like this quote, too. The best way to get most youth involved in and serious about their faith communities is to get their parents more involved in and serious about their faith communities. That's one of my favorite quotes. So when we're thinking about, that's from Kristen Smith, when we're thinking about youth ministry and we want those youth involved in our faith communities, we need to be thinking about how the parents are involved in the faith communities too. Okay? Another important one is safety. And I think we heard that a little bit in Tracy Hurd's thing. Safety is very important, feeling safe. And also that whole thing with fitting in. This is the time when they're really trying to feel like they're fitting in. So, let's see. Yes. Yeah, Lane mentioned that they hold parent sessions to give them opportunities to talk together. So do we do that in other areas as well, though? So, do we do that about faith and spirituality and stuff like that? So there are ways to really maybe use some of those models we have in OWL and bring them out of just talking about sexuality and gender and body image and things like that, and bring them into questions of faith and spirituality and moral development. So I wanted to highlight those things, and we'll have that article up there for people to take a look at some point, too, if they'd like to. And so now, Nancy, I just wanted to do a little bit of the generational thing, because soul searching, yes, Nancy's put that in for us. There's what I was talking about in the chat, soul searching. To me, this is something new, and this is becoming more and more important that we do this. It used to be you just kind of abstractly, developmentally knew what was going on with youth at this stage, and then young adults at this stage, and middle adults and stuff like that. But over the last, I'd say, 20 years, there's been a lot of emphasis on generational differences that are influenced by culture and society. So it's not just the developmental stage for individuals, but it's actually where each generation kind of fits in the kind of sequence of how generations work with each other. And so I think one of the things that's good to even know about is to know more than just the developmental differences, but also know what's going on with the generations we're talking about. So, Linnea, were you the one who was at the first 21st Century Faith Formation recently? No? Wasn't you, Laura, right?
I was at one recently, yeah.
Yeah, you were. Okay, right. Okay. Yeah, and so John Roberto is very big into covering this, talking about the generations and how doing generational faith formation is really important. And we might think, oh, well, we're just talking about these first few generations, but actually, when we're talking about 13 to 15-year-olds right now, we're talking about the newest generation in United States culture, okay? So we've had the builder generation, which some people call the silent generation, but builder is a little more positive sounding. The baby boomer generation, Generation X, and those are the parents, for the most part, of our new kids who, the 13 to 15-year-olds that are coming through our religious education programs right now. The millennial generation, these would be those later adolescents and young adults that we're talking about right now, those emerging adults. And then this new generation, which John Roberto is speculating, calling Generation 2000, or the I generation. But I found a resource called, it's someplace that does research into generations, and they've named them the plurals. And they think that's the name that's going to stick, but I don't know. But anyway, they've done some research into what's affected this generation. So what's going on right now with these kids, with these adolescents in our congregations and in the culture in general is they're part of a society where there's a continual erosion of dominant media, so television, newspapers, magazines, all those ways we used to get information are being torn apart by technology primarily. And while that's happening, there's an emergence of more voices, and it's more fragmented, and they're more niche-based voices. So people who were kind of on the margins are finding places to be heard more and more. In society, there's more ground-up consensus building. And this is interesting. There's a huge contrast between baby boomer style and Gen X style of raising children. And the Gen X style is the dominant style. It's interesting. There's growing conflict surrounding demographic changes, and we've had the second longest economic decline in U.S. history. So what does this mean for this plural, or I personally like I generation, but I don't know which one's going to stick, like I said. Well, here's what's going on with them. This is the very last generation in America where Caucasians or whites are going to be the majority, okay? The last generation. Most of these kids of this age in this generation are very positive about America becoming more ethnically diverse. The first president they're going to ever remember is Barack Obama, right? They're going to grow up with America as a black president. No question about that at all. Their existing social circles are more diverse. They know more different kinds of people than certainly baby boomers did, you know. My son goes to a school, in public school in St. Paul. It's about 50% Caucasian and 50% a wide range of the kind of different ethnicities and cultures that make up the population in St. Paul. So there's Muslims, there's blacks, there's Native Americans, there's Hispanics. It's just a very wide range of ethnicities and cultures. What's interesting, too, is they're least likely to believe in the American dream. And yes, they actually did talk to kids of this generation to find out how they responded to some of these things. As I said, the Gen X parenting style is being reflected in their mindset. And also they're growing up more in an age where there's a blending of gender roles, but also there's this more, people are more open about expressing different kinds of gender identities, period, right? That's in the culture now. So those developmental things that Tracy Hurd was talking about, she wrote that book in 2005. It's 8 years old. She was probably, this generation was not forming then. Yeah, Lane, I'll talk about that. Good question. Let me grab my resource on that, and I'll mention that. Lane's wanting to hear a little bit more about that difference in the parenting styles, and I'll grab that. But, yes. Nancy, what was I saying?
I know it was ripping. I was reading Lane's thing and I lost your strain. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. No problem, Lane. Yeah, usually what we do is when we pair up. I hate to say it, I got my iPad out, which I had all set to access some stuff for me, and it's not accessing the things I wanted to access. So I'm going to just have to just give me a second. I'm going to have to access it on my computer, which means, you're watching me do this right now. But this is about those different parenting styles. And yes, that is a good question, Lane, because I had to go over that a couple times to really try to figure out what they were talking about in that article. So what we're talking about in those different parenting styles is, the American dream, Gen X parenting style is beginning to show in their mindset. And the big changes are, here's just some ideas. The Xer parenting style is more individual-oriented, and I've got an article about this too that we'll put up, whereas the Boomer style is more group-oriented. And here are some of the key differences they look at. Gen X parenting is protection through surveillance, while Boomer parenting is protection through involvement. Gen X parenting is what's best for my child, whereas Boomer parenting is more like what's best for the group of children. Gen X parenting is teaching children how to be successful, and Boomer parenting is giving children what they need to be successful. Gen X parenting is realistic. Do what you're good at. This is a big difference. Realistic. Do what you're good at. Whereas Boomer parenting is aspirational. You can do anything. That was the message. Like, you can be anything you want to be. And I've heard this. There's a more practical thing like this. No, you can't be anything you want to be, but you are good at some things, and, we're here to help you be a success at what you're good at doing. And then Gen X parenting, only the best win, where boomer parenting is more like everybody wins. So that's this one article that I will put up there in our document section. But those are the kind of differences that they're talking about that's going on. So if we're saying that if we want the children and youth to be involved in the church and we need to get the parents involved, we've got, we might be making assumptions about what parenting's about, what parenting styles are about, that we need to explore. And it's also influencing those children that we have there too. And it may mean that some of these things that Tracy Hurd was talking about the identities, the gender identities, et cetera, the racial identities, some of those things might be working differently in this generation than they did with the millennials. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So something I really want to emphasize, and this is as you continue doing your work, is be aware of what the generational cohorts are like as they come through your church school, come through your RE programs, because that's going to add a certain flavor to those developmental tasks that they're going through. So it's kind of two things. George Lakoff's idea of nurturing parenting. Yes. So, all right. So now we're going to move.
It looks like I misspelled nurturing parenting, but Lakoff is worthy of checking out, especially around issues of progressive parenting.
Yeah.
We are. Tapestry of Faith Conceptual Framework. In my timing, we have approximately about 30 minutes left. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. So I imagine that almost every one of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the Tapestry of Faith curriculum series, and hopefully you have read the vision statement that was posted in our Litmos site. But you may not have encountered the conceptual framework document. Have folks had a chance to look at that at all, the one that's on the Litmos site?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So I'm just going to do a brief review, but I want to engage with folks around this because the linkage is important in our parameters of what we're trying to achieve in this online series of courses, linking the expectations with the RE credentialing program, the acknowledgement of what the continuum, the chart that says all the areas that you're supposed to be familiar in. There wasn't a piece necessarily focusing on this conceptual framework or vision statement. So when we were talking and communicating with Jan Gartner, I lifted up that I felt that it was very important that as a paradigm that all of us as religious professionals in Unitarian Universalism, whether religious educators or ministers, that we understand this new era. It's not even actually that new. It's now almost 10 years old, the Tapestry of Faith curriculum series and vision statement. But the era, it was a shift change in thinking, which I'm sure some of you already acknowledge, from the pillar approach of just studying the content of the Judeo-Christian tradition, social justice, Unitarian Universalist history, and world religions. My hand, I can't help but talk with my hands there, but so this pillar approach, and that's when I first became a religious educator, when I first got to know Lane, and the pillar approach was about content, covering measurable content. The paradigm shift change in Tapestry is that it is describing values that we are trying to grow and nurture in one another, children, youth, and adults. And so it's so important that we move forward. So, Phil, I can do this toggle?
Yeah, you should be able to advance your own slides.
Hey, okay. So you may know that the 4 strands within the Tapestry of Faith curriculum series, the conceptual framework, are ethical development, spiritual development, Unitarian Universalist religious identity, and faith development. I actually believe that these really have sort of taken the place of the pillars, but please don't go back to thinking, okay, we're going to do just 1 year of this, 1 year of that, because there's so many wonderful offerings in each of them. But there are core aspects to all of these strands that really do weave into our understanding of the qualities that we're trying to nurture and enhance in Unitarian Universalist religious education. So in terms of ethical development, and Tracy names this and many others, you often see it in terms of being framed as moral development. but I think ethical development is something important to lift up. You may remember back in the fellowship movement in the 1950s, many of our fellowships actually identified themselves as ethical societies. And those Sunday mornings were opportunities to wrestle with big ethical questions. That has not disappeared from our consciousness. And thankfully to our humanist tradition and our humanist grounding in many, many, many of our congregations, this is continually lifted up. So imagine youth and young adults who realize that they are moral agents capable of making a difference in the lives of others, challenging structures of social and political oppressions, promoting the health and well-being of the planet. So this is a descriptor of that ethical strand in the conceptual framework of Tapestry of Faith. You'll see that it doesn't say, tick box, they need to study the death penalty and the effect on the American public. They need to study the horrific element of prisons and how, this is so shameful in our culture. All of these things are important. So it's not so much just content, but we're trying to grow and enhance and to create a fostering environment where the young people, and especially I think this is a critical, sensitive age, that if we don't reach out and open up the hearts of youth and young adults to really grasp this piece, that we're calling for them to be in community, in the greater world. We're calling them to be the people that show up on the front lines, that show up on the picket lines, that show up to make a difference in communities. So this sense of actually challenging structures of social and political oppression. Sometimes this is a pushback item. Feel in our congregation. They're giving me the heads up to move on, or are you coughing, Phil? Okay. I just think that this is a critically important element that we do. Now, remember, in ethical development, this is a time for values exploration. It's actually a time to say that we have an image in our brains of what kind of character that we want to have. I say this to my son. He's 22, and when he was growing up as a teen, I said, this is the kind of character I want you to have. I want you to be humane and kind and faithful. It was something that I used as a constant refrain. We're calling our youth and our young adults to right action, but it's not a matter of just calling them to it. This is and this is, again, their developmental aspect. They need to wrestle with these questions in safe, small group ministry type environments with other adults who can actually help them wrestle with these questions. It's also a chance in this ethical development in the conceptual framework to say that we're actually calling folks to one of our strongest principles, and that is the use of democracy and the use of the vote and being a part of communities that have this sense of equality and justice, and also to be good stewards. So spiritual development. For those of you who've been around for a while, you realize that in Tapestry of Faith vision statement, it was the first time that we saw an esteem placed upon developing spiritual practices. It does not say develop an absolute need for spirituality. It says that we are all to have a sense of different repertoire of spiritual practices that will serve us. And I think this is a great opportunity in our congregations, and I'd love to see some of your projects if you want to explore what would be a good spiritual practice for that 12 to 15 age group. Maybe it's learning body praying, or maybe it's having a sitting sangha as opposed to a middle school class where they actually get together and do contemplative time and meditation. Giving that sense of a repertoire of spiritual practices is a time for the adults working with these sensitive youth, especially to share of themselves. What is the spiritual practice that we do as the adults who are mentoring and shepherding young adolescents? And to actually say that there is a value here, that it will serve in your own human development throughout your life, in good times and in bad. But a spiritual practice will not serve you at a time of acute grieving. If a teen loses a fellow friend to suicide, it will not serve them well if that's the time that they get introduced to the spiritual practice. So you see why this is so important to foster this grounding, that if they're able to achieve a little bit of peace in the discord of everyday world, then it will serve them when they have to face real obstacles and real trauma and real challenges. So UU Identity, we finally stepped up during the Tapestry of Faith curriculum series and this time of conceptual framework to say that there is something important to impart in Unitarian Universalism, to affirm that they are youth and young adults and absolute needed and esteemed and respected a part of our UU religious heritage. That actually, and this is interesting, I was listening to something else from a Presbyterian who was saying that when you invite youth and young adults to step up and become a part of the heritage, you've got to be prepared that you're inviting them to revitalize and transform. So you just can't say, we just want you to become familiar with it. We actually have to be open to the possibility of the change and the prophetic vision and the prophetic voices of these youth and young adults. Recognizing the need for community, and this is also something with the spiritual practices and spiritual identity piece, having that invitation, inviting your teens to actually, maybe you do have a sitting practice of adults who come in before worship every Sunday morning. What if your youth group actually says for 1 month, our youth group session is going to that sitting practice, or perhaps it is a yoga session or something else, but inviting them and realizing that this is something in community, but also something that they can do at home. Also, a shift change that happened in this conceptual framework for Tapestry of Faith was an absolute articulation of the importance of families, as Phil was just lifting up with this age group. Families remain important. They may not be articulating that, but they remain absolutely critical in the development of our young people. This accepting that they're responsible for the stewardship and creative transformation of our religious heritage, so important to be honest about our religious heritage. I think Mark Morrison Reed and his work, Black Pioneers in a White Denomination, would be a wonderful resource to introduce to our teens, especially that we have made mistakes. We are not perfect as an association of congregations, but that we are responsible for calling ourselves to right relationship and to better response to living in a pluralistic and wonderful faith. And that in the service of diversity, justice, and compassion, I'm hoping that every single youth and young adult holds on to this for their entire lives. Now, faith development, that often is a hot potato. I get that question more than any other when I'm presenting this. What is faith development? This is coming from religious educators. And at the recent Fall Loretta Conference, Andrea Lerner, Pat Infante, and I did a piece on Faith Formation 2020 and the importance of faith development. And again, it was the number one question. And I think it's important to realize in this construct, it's also lifting up the developmental phases of faith development. Some of you all may have read the work of James Fowler, and there are other theorists in terms of faith stage development, and that is a piece of this, but it's also being formed by the three other strands. So you've got your ethical strand, your spirituality, and your UU religious identity. These all flow into faith development. And it is the demonstration of how the integration of beliefs and values with everyday life, and again, these developmental stages. And this is where demonstrating ethical living and acquiring life skills becomes really super important. I'm going to go back because I want to pause there. So any questions or comments about why I'm lifting this up as something that we should be thinking of and weaving into our projects and weaving into our awareness? And any questions about that or comments? I've stunned you into silence.
No, Lane's got a question. It's on the chat. Can you see it?
I see identifies. That's a great question. Some actually do.
Yeah, we're going to look at that in a second.
Yeah, some do work on multiple strands, and that's why these fabulous debriefs, if you have a curriculum committee or a small group of people that you work with in developing choices, that would be great. Actually, my prayer is that every congregation, your ministers and your religious educators working together, keeps this vision statement up before you. So you're thinking about all the strands and say, what have we done to attend to growing young people into lovable agents, who actually want to be a moral agent, who want to affect change? And is that working on spirituality? Is it working on ethical? Is it working on their UU identity? And is it working on faith? Yes, there actually are some activities that work on all of them. And that's a workshop that I do actually on this Tapestry of Faith. I have people break into small groups to say, come up with activities that do respond to this. But again, I think that if we lift this up as a conceptual descriptor of who we are trying to grow and the qualities that we're trying to grow, we get away from the fact that we used to spend a year on understanding what Hinduism is and Buddhism. Very important to have familiarization with world religions, but quite different if you look at it in an ethical context of how to live in a pluralistic society and being sensitive to that. So any other? My church misses the concrete nature of the pillar system. Yeah, and a lot do, because it offered an organizational framework.
Yeah.
And it offered, that was the first thing I was given as a religious educator was a map, a very specific map of all of the choices. And I think we're getting closer to understanding how Tapestry of Faith vision statement can be used.
Yeah.
Looking at these 4 strands. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, looking for how to use Tapestry of Faith and make it more explicit, and we're going to look at one particular one here, the families one. If we can talk about those strands in the vision statement and help people see that the Tapestry of Faith curricula, but even anything else we're trying, if we can start to say this is about the ethical development, this part of it, and this is about spiritual development, if we can change the language a little bit and rather than looking for those pillars to hang things on and start talking about the different strands to put things on, I think it'll help people get more of a concrete sense of what we're trying to do here. Okay?
And the characteristics, the value-laden characteristics that we're trying to grow as opposed to content, measurable content. I think my dream, if we're using this correctly, and this is something articulated very clearly in OWL, is that sense of helping especially teens, and, I've done OWL now with young adults as well, making safer choices, more healthy choices. Well, actually, I think that if we looked at this in a broader, bigger way, my prayer for all of religious education is to enable individuals to make not just healthy and safer choices, but faithful choices. Think about having a teen experience where it's about conscientious consumption and looking at all these strands and saying, what does this call us to do when we have to go to the store and think about where does this chicken come from if we're buying it, or where does this chocolate come from, or, there's so many different ways to weave in real-life examples. That's the skill taken to their greater life that will make a difference in their greater community, thoughtful consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Want to talk about this family?
Sure, because I think it gets a little bit lame on it, and what I did is I looked at the intros to what's going on in the Tapestry Faith curricula. I found 3 that are pretty explicitly for early adolescents. There's one called Families, which is a photo essay kind of, photo documentary sort of curriculum where the youth actually are taking pictures of the different kinds of families and things like that. One thing I would say is the technology is changing so quickly. It's good to keep up on what's available now. So, so many youth have their own phones now with their own cameras. It's just very easy for them to take pictures. But not only that, they can take videos. And there's just some wonderful platforms and programs out there to help put together very nice presentations. And so I don't know if you heard about Vine. It's the latest thing that Twitter did, but it makes 6-second looping videos that you can use iPhones to make these things with. And so that's more than just a picture. It's, it's actually movement and things like that. So when you look at a curriculum that involves using some technology, go ahead and think about what new technologies there might be to add to it, because the youth are probably already using the new technologies, right? So if we go in and say, well, we're all going to take a digital camera now and take a picture, they're like they have all sorts of ways of doing photos now. Okay, so this one of the 3 I looked at, this was the one that was most explicit about how this curriculum does the Tapestry of Faith strands, okay? And Nancy, I'm just going to flash on them, and you want to comment on them too. But so here's the ethical development, okay? So ethically, broaden and deepen the understanding and definitions of families. Explore the meaning of healthy families in diversity forms. Explore each person's individual worth and realize their unique perspective in interpreting their world as tellers of stories. And Nancy, you mentioned narrative being so important, right? And being able to act things out. So the stories are important. Build and foster the ability to understand multiple perspectives, and then develop the ethics of care and responsibility. And Nancy, you were really just, you articulated that so well. What are we trying to instill in them, right? This ethic of care, the ethic of responsibility, through intimate and ethical process of engaging with and representing families. So can you see how the ethical strand very intentionally gets played out in this curriculum? Then the spiritual development, to understand emotional, affective, and spiritual dimensions of family life. And there's that intertwining of different things to make up the spiritual dimension. To have that personal sense of values around family. So there's an ethical thing moving towards the spiritual. Even spirituality through engagement with others and using an artistic medium. Arts are fantastic for developing spirituality, right? Engage in a shared ministry of focusing literally and figuratively on the faces and narratives of congregational members, seeing them, really seeing who they are, visually, literally, and figuratively. That's the spiritual exercise and practice. Growing deeper in their naturally compassionate souls. That's kind of a spiritual language for that ethics of care and responsibility. This is saying there is a natural compassion in their souls we're trying to develop, and engage joyfully in creation of art. So that's the spiritual strand being played out in here. Here's the UU identity. Learn more fully that there is no objective point of view, so that's something that comes from our religious tradition. Understand that the living tradition of the faith and its principles and purpose can interpret and guide families. So this is part of what they're exploring in the curriculum when they're out interviewing families, taking pictures, things like that. They're finding out how Unitarian Universalist faith and principles help guide that family, and learn how the fundamentals of photography translate to our way of living and interpreting the world in a more general way. So they're actually using some technology, using a device that's helping them understand how our faith can be translated into how we live our lives. And then finally, faith development. Engage as leaders of a project that serves to the greater congregation and affirms more deeply their place in the interdependent, multi-generational congregational life. Collaborate with peers, so they're learning that our faith is about collaboration, and getting that experience as a photographer, an artist, a storyteller, all right, within this faith community. So this curriculum, more than some of them, is so very intentionally taking those strands and showing how what they're doing in these various lessons and exercises and projects is actually building on each of those strands. So what was that? We had some chat going on. Nancy, do you want to let me know what was happening over there?
Lane was sharing that they had used the families curriculum, and I said cool. And then I agree with you, Lane, that the biggest critique that I hear and I experience myself is the unwieldy, large nature of so much of the tapestry of faith curriculum. And I think that what we don't realize is that this is a blessing, that there is so much to pull from. But I actually think the greatest service that religious educators could provide to one another is sort of the crib notes. So like, how did we use this? And especially in Kentucky and Southern Ohio, I'm encouraging religious educators that when they have worked out a series of this is what we used in this, and this worked really well, and here's the take-home piece I gave, to actually keep a hold of that, because I'm afraid that we'll lose it, and actually share it with one another. And so when I do new DRE startups, the first thing I do is link them with another religious educator who has navigated through tapestry fairly well. So maybe we'll take this on as a Loretta project or something. But it is wonderful, wonderful content. I'm not going to begrudge our wonderful curriculum development folks. Go ahead. Someone saying something? Maybe not. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nancy, because, yes, even though it's online, it's still pretty static. They're not like going through and modifying them as they get more information about how they were used and stuff like that. So what Nancy's saying is we're kind of responsible to each other to help each other use these new curricula, or if they're new to us, to find out how other people used it, what kind of modifications they made, And so if we can make those connections and help each other with this, I think that's one of the best things we can do in using these.
And with the idea of using the 4 strands as sort of a similar model to pillars, I really would want anyone to use the descriptions of each of those. It's not just ethical development. The descriptions are so glowing and wonderful. It makes you think of real individuals and how did they get that way. And a part of it is by being in community and showing up on Sunday morning and seeing the difference that other people can make in their lives and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, and Linnea is mentioning that they have teachers fill out, what works, what didn't, what they liked, and then they have those for the notes for the teachers next year. Yeah. So having some sort of central repository would be fantastic. So that's something we might encourage a project like Nancy was saying, Loretta, or something where we can do this. Yeah. So this one was very explicit about how the strands played out. And like I said, other Tapestry of Faith curriculum may not be so specific, but you can look at it and critique it from that and say, what are the faith developmental tasks that are going on in this curriculum, and make that part of your assessment of it, and then figure out how you're going to use it to, really highlight the things that you feel like need to be highlighted with that particular group at that time. Maybe they are leaning more towards the spiritual bent in how they approach things, and so how are we going to use this so that we can heighten that strand if that's what that group really needs right now. So that's what we're hoping, that you begin to see these strands as ways to understand how we're going to use the curricula. I want to show you the other 2 that I found. One was called Heeding the Call. It's a justice curriculum. And remember that whole thing about, that's part of the development at this age, is get them out into the world and learning how they can take all of that new moral and intellectual growth and learning and turn it into kind of a way to be engaged in the world. So identify the qualities needed to create social justice, look at it as a spiritual journey, how to engage in the work, connect them with the sense of belonging to Unitarian Universalism about social justice actions of Unitarian Universalists. So I see that both as the ethical strand and the UU identity strand. See how they're tied up together there? So it doesn't need to be told to us. If we start to look at it this way, we can find those things. Provide tools, use the tools they can use in justice work. And so that's, an ethical thing too. All right. And then finally, or last couple of things, we have OWL. And what's interesting, I think, here is to take the OWL statements of self-worth, sexual health, responsibility, justice, and inclusivity. Look at models, the way they're talking about how we teach it and what we're teaching, caring, compassion, respect, and justice, and what we're hoping that they can do. And we think back to that developmental stage. This is just so crucial, right? Attitudes, values, and feelings about themselves, their sexuality, and other people's sexuality. So you see how it really fits in just so wonderfully with what the actual developmental tasks are. And also when we look at it in terms of the strands of the Tapestry of Faith, we can find where these things are being expressed in there. And then just finally, to get us a preview for next week, there is the Coming of Age Handbook, which is one of the few things in the Tapestry of Faith series that is not online. You actually have to buy this handbook. Sarah Gibbs-Millspaugh wrote it. And this is the kind of the goals of what's going on in this curriculum. So identify qualities needed to create justice, explore social justice as individual and collective acts of a spiritual journey, demonstrate how to engage in social justice. These are the justice ones. Connect to your sense of belonging. So here's the identity strand to Unitarian Universalism by learning about social justice actions of Unitarian Universalists, and to provide tools where they can work in justice. That looks really familiar. So what do we have here, Nancy? Did you just type something?
Oh, that's my 2 bits. That's my, anyway. Yes. I agree, Lane is a great resource, the Coming of Age Handbook.
Yeah, we need to really, I think, make good use of this. And so what we're going to do next time, we've got a few minutes left. Like I said, what we're going to do next time, talk about middle adolescence and rites of passage. Nancy, were we going to try to find some times for a phone call?
Yes, I just wanted to review because a couple of folks weren't on our first session, and I know you listened to it, just bears repeating. These are didactic sessions which you don't get as much time to engage, and I really, and I know Phil does, we want to engage with you. And so I was going to send out a meeting wizard to our email list to explore alternate times. We also want to achieve the 15 hours of engagement in this content, whether it's in small group discussion or these didactic sessions, to make sure that you can count this as a relevant learning or a structured learning, depending on the level that you're going for in your credentialing program. So our third didactic session is February 24th or 23rd?
23rd.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was at 7:45 Eastern Standard Time in the evening, but it is also a Saturday. So there's a break between that and the March session. So I was thinking of sending out the meeting wizard, looking at times to talk during that break. And that way we could hear from one another what our project ideas are, what kind of support we need from one another, how the material is resonating well. And again, Phil and I very much want this to be very much something where you give us feedback about the technology and the content and all of that. Anything else, Phil?
No, that's really it. I mean, these questions about, what happens when you don't have the pillars anymore, those are the kind of questions we want to talk about together. And so it's great to bring them up here and know that if we don't really talk about those sort of things during these webinars, we plan on talking about them together as a learning community during these phone calls. I just wanted to really highlight that. So if there are questions remaining when we get done with these presentations, we want to make time for us to explore things together. Okay? All right.
So in closing from May Thornton, she says, every day I make some gesture, think or feel something through the influence of one or another, many of them friends. And there's much more to it, but I just love the idea that every day that she does something through the influence of others. And so I'm hoping that we have that sense of openness in this time that we engage with one another. I'm sorry that Phil and I do so much talking at you during this, but I'm looking forward to those small group discussions.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And we'll talk to you on the phone, and hopefully we'll see you next Saturday, too. All right?
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.